As a beginner video editor, your first step is to choose the right video editing software. And with so many choices out there, it can be tough to know which one to pick. What you need is an app that's affordable, easy to use, but also has the functionality to help you create the content you envision. DaVinci Resolve is free in its basic version, so could that be the best video editor for beginners? Let's find out. Hey! Yeah, I changed my YouTube studio up a little bit again. I got a standing desk now. I read somewhere that just by standing you burn about 100 kilocalories per hour, actually a little bit more depending on you and your metabolism. And as you can probably notice, my metabolism is not that good right now. So I thought it's probably time again to get a standing desk and do a bit more sport. And as you can see, I would say that looks pretty good, or? So, welcome to my new YouTube studio. So, grab yourself a glass of water, and then it's time to talk about if DaVinci Resolve is actually a good video editor for beginners. Getting a call now. That's good, I get some cable management stuff for the desk as well. Got this power plug with USB-C ports, we'll see how that goes. So one of your main concerns is probably the ease of use of DaVinci Resolve because, well, let's be honest, it looks pretty bloated. Like there are so many features included, you have all the different pages, etc. There's so much you can do with DaVinci Resolve. And I think that especially because you have these multiple pages available in DaVinci Resolve, that actually makes it quite easy to use because you have all these super professional features on the Fusion page, but you can also keep it very, very simple by, for example, only using the edit page and the delivery page, or maybe the color page if you shot in log footage, and even there it's actually quite easy. Overall, when you're looking at the edit page, for example, I found it very similar to Final Cut or other video editors because you have your media browser there, and from there you grab all your media files, drag them into the timeline. In the timeline you have similar tools available as in other video editors, and I like the timeline of DaVinci Resolve because it's quite a mix of Final Cut and Adobe Premiere, because it's like when you cut something down, and some clips also move similarly to how Final Cut does that with the magnetic timeline, but it's also a bit more similar to Premiere. If you do other cuts, then everything stays where it is. It's more like when you remove space, then everything moves together. And I actually like this approach a lot because it makes it possible to easily align everything in the timeline, everything stays where it is. But if you want that certain parts in the timeline move when you remove some spacing, it does that. And then you also have the inspector that you will use a lot on the edit page, and there are actually some tools included that are super easy to use. At first there is the dynamic zoom effect, which essentially means that you can only do 2 cuts in a clip and then press one button that automatically creates a zoom animation for you. It's also nice and smooth, and usually you would have to use keyframes for that. So I think for beginners that is actually really nice. It just makes it easy. It's just a click of a button and you have the zoom effect. And there are also other tools. DaVinci Resolve has one of the best stabilizations out there, and it's again most of the time just a click of a button and already your clip is stabilized. And if you're looking at the overall inspector window, it's actually also very similar to use like in Final Cut. You can quickly do adjustments to your crop there, you can change the position, and even if you want to be a little bit more advanced by adding keyframe animations, it also works really easy. You just have your playhead in the timeline on one position, then you press keyframe and you move to another location in the timeline, you change some settings there, it automatically adds another keyframe and it's animated. It's actually that easy. And then you might want to use the color page also, but DaVinci Resolve has color management, which it is a bit complicated in the first few minutes because you have to learn the basic settings, how to set up the color management. But this is basically just one or a few settings that you just have to learn right off your head, and after that you just apply the settings all over again all the time to all projects that you have. You can even do that automatically, and it basically does the color grading for you, or you only have to do a little bit of color grading and it already looks pretty good. So that's why I think that while it might look a bit complicated when you look at it the first time, if you get into it for a few minutes, or maybe even you watch one of the Resolve courses from their website, or even my course which is coming out in about 2 weeks, then you will actually learn that in less than an hour just to use the edit page. It's actually not that complicated. So, how is the learning curve in DaVinci Resolve? I would say that the overall learning curve in DaVinci Resolve is fairly similar to any other professional video editor, because the main difference is actually, again, similar to ease of use, just between those easy editors on your phone or iMovie, etc. Because there it's really just you have to learn how to arrange clips in a timeline. The rest is pretty much there already. But I would actually say that this is a bad thing about simple video editors, because there you don't learn much. You learn like simple stuff about how to arrange clips in a timeline, etc., which is important, of course. But on a professional video editor, you always learn a lot more, and you learn that in a very short amount of time, because while editing your first videos, there always comes this point where you want to have a little bit more. You saw a nice feature of this app and therefore you try it out, and maybe something doesn't work directly, then you watch some tutorials and you learn it, and then you've mastered a new skill. And that's why the learning curve in DaVinci Resolve is actually very steep, but I wouldn't say that it's like more or less steeper as Final Cut or Adobe Premiere or so. It's fairly similar. Maybe it takes sometimes a bit longer to learn something, but then a bit less long to learn other stuff. And that's a good thing, because in a short amount of time you will just learn a lot more, as you would do with other video editors, especially those simpler ones. So if you worry about that the learning curve would be a little bit too steep or so, I would not worry about that. The very basics, they will go very fast, but then over time you will learn a lot of more important stuff. And another important factor is obviously the cost. If you're just starting out, you don't want to spend that much money. And there DaVinci Resolve comes in two versions. At first the free version and also the studio version, which costs $300, what for a beginner might be a lot of money, but if you compare it to others, it's actually quite standard. Like Final Cut also costs $300, and in Final Cut you later need more plugins, so overall you will pay more money on Final Cut than for DaVinci Resolve. Adobe Premiere comes at a subscription, so over time you will pay a lot more money for Adobe Premiere as you would do in DaVinci Resolve as well. So overall I'm actually quite happy with the price. But now, of course, if you're starting out, maybe using the free version would be the best option, right? And there I made a small list to see what you lose when you get the free version, and that's at first that the studio version has a little bit better performance. I think it uses more GPU cores or something like that. Then in the studio version you can use resolutions of 4K DCI or higher, like everything above 4K. So if you shoot normal 4K videos, you want to edit that, etc., no problem, you can do that. You get a few more special effects in the studio version. That's especially motion blur, that's lens flares, dirt removal, film grain, deflicker, and also noise reduction. But I must say, when you're just starting out, these effects might look fancy at first, you might like them, but you don't actually need them to make good videos. Like I could perfectly make good videos without those effects. So this is more something for later, and I think it's perfectly fine to pay $300 for that, because if you would buy plugins to get the same effects, you would end up paying a lot more. And then in the studio version you also get the neural engine, which is there, for example, for face tracking with a magic mask, or also face detection, for example, if you want to detect faces automatically in a certain scene, etc., to sort clips in the media browser. But you probably guess already that is also something that you will most likely not use as a beginner, so I think that's neglectable. And there are a few more features, but they're also not that important that you would get with the studio version. I would actually say that I did not need those features in my first 1 or maybe even 2 years of video editing, so you will most likely be safe from that as well. So that's why it's safe to say that DaVinci Resolve is actually free for beginners. And if you're a bit concerned about having less performance as in the studio version, it's definitely not bad. It's more for certain effects that you don't need in the beginning anyway. The free version of DaVinci Resolve will work perfectly fine with the stuff that you need as a beginner, and actually even as a more advanced user. now let's also talk about performance and stability of DaVinci Resolve. And DaVinci Resolve is certainly not perfect. I had the one or the other crash, but that is the first thing that is good about DaVinci Resolve compared to Adobe Premiere. It automatically saves all the changes that you do, so in case DaVinci Resolve crashes, you don't lose your progress. And that is, I think, one thing that many Adobe Premiere users will like. I'm already used to that because Final Cut does it the same. So in Final Cut I also never lost anything, but in other video editors that's not available, so that is a big plus. And when it comes to performance of DaVinci Resolve, I would overall rate it really good. I use it right now on the iPad Pro 12.2 inch because I'm doing a little challenge now where I only use the iPad Pro for 1 month. I don't use my MacBook at all because I really want to figure out if I can use it as a MacBook replacement. And so far, from a few quick test edits, the performance on the M2 iPad Pro was actually really good. It's kind of as expected. Like the moment I add some like fusion effects, some tiles or so on, then it starts lagging, but that is okay because DaVinci Resolve has this feature that you can turn off all the effects and color grades, etc., and just continue editing. Then in that case, like none of those computers have any problems. And of course, on my M1 Max MacBook Pro, it runs like butter all the time. Of course, when I have heavy fusion effects, etc., then I also get some lag there, but it's pretty rare. So overall, very fast experience there. But you will most likely not add it on an M1 Max as a beginner. So I think it's a bit better to talk about the experience now with the iPad Pro because that has the M2 chip with 16 gigs of RAM, and that is more similar to what you will most likely use when you're starting out, probably an M2 or M1 MacBook Pro, etc., so that the performance should be fairly similar. And there I can only say you won't have any issues performance-wise. So let's wrap this up. I think when watching this video, you're probably not looking for just a super basic video editor like iMovie, Windows Movie Maker, or some video editors on your phone, etc. You're probably looking for something more professional. And when it comes to that, I think that you should 100% try DaVinci Resolve, because I think that DaVinci Resolve is overall the best video editor out there, and you can even use it for free. I mean, in the beginning, you don't need certain features such as motion blur, etc. That will take a long time until you really need those things. So you can completely start for free, and if you don't like it, then you can still like use another video editor later and you didn't lose any money or so. So it's completely risk-free. And I think it makes a lot of sense to learn DaVinci Resolve directly, because to me it's very clear that DaVinci Resolve will only get more popular in the future. So by learning DaVinci Resolve directly, you already invest your knowledge into a video editor that will most likely be the biggest video editor later. So what do you think? Did you already try DaVinci Resolve, and did you find it complicated, or was it quite easy to get into? Let me know in the comments below. And by the way, in about 2 weeks of time, my DaVinci Resolve course will go online. There you will learn DaVinci Resolve quickly. So if you're interested in that, you will find a link to the newsletter in the description below. There you will get notified when the course got live. No spam there or anything. I will only notify you about the course and nothing else. Then you will get removed from my newsletter again. And aside from that, if you want to know which plugins I use with DaVinci Resolve, because there are still some plugins that you might want to buy even if you don't need that many on DaVinci Resolve, then check out this video here in the corner. There you will learn more. I hope to see you there, and also if you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like and consider subscribing for upcoming tutorials about DaVinci Resolve.